Writings and Speeches. Volume 3. Part 3. Revolution and Counter-Revolution. Chapter 9. The Decline and Fall of Buddhism. The disappearance of Buddhism from India has been a matter of great surprise to everybody who cares to think about the subject, and is also a matter of regret. But it lives in China, Japan, Burma, Siam, Annam, Indochina, Ceylon, and parts of Malaya Archipelago. In India alone, it has ceased to exist. Not only it has ceased to live in India, but even the name of Buddha has gone out of memory of most Hindus. How such a thing have happened? This is an important question for which there has been no satisfactory answer. Not only there is no satisfactory answer, nobody has made an attempt to arrive at a satisfactory answer. In dealing with this subject, people fail to make a very important distinction. It is a distinction between the fall of Buddhism and the decline of Buddhism. It is necessary to make this distinction because the fall of Buddhism is one, the reasons for which are very different from those which brought about its downfall. For the fall is due to quite obvious causes, while the reasons for its decline are not quite so obvious. There can be no doubt that the fall of Buddhism in India was due to the invasions of the Muslims. Islam came out as the enemy of the Buddha. The word Buddha, as everybody knows, an Arabic word and means an idol. Not many people, however, know what the derivation of the word Buddha is. Buddha is the Arabic corruption of Buddha. Thus, the origin of the word indicates that in the Muslim mind, idol worship had come to be identified with the religion of the Buddha. To the Muslims, they were one and the same thing. The mission to break the idols thus became the mission to destroy Buddhism. Islam destroyed Buddhism not only in India but wherever it went. Before Islam came into being, Buddhism was the religion of Bactria, Parthia, Afghanistan, Gundar, and Chinese Turkestan, as it was of the whole of Asia. In all these countries, Islam destroyed Buddhism. As Vincent Smith points out, the furious massacre perpetrated in many places by Muslim invaders were more efficacious than Orthodox Hindu persecutions, and had a great deal to do with the disappearance of Buddhism in several provinces of India. Not all will be satisfied with this explanation. It does seem inadequate. Islam attacked both Brahmanism and Buddhism. It will be asked, why should one survive and the other perish? The argument is plausible but not destructive of the validity of the thesis. To admit that Brahmanism survived, it does not mean that the fall of Buddhism was not due to the sword of Islam. All that it means is that there were circumstances which made it possible for Brahmanism and impossible for Buddhism to survive the onslaught of Islam. Fortunately for Brahmanism and unfortunately for Buddhism, that was the fact. Those who will pursue the matter will find that there were three special circumstances which made it possible for Brahmanism and impossible for Buddhism to survive the calamity of Muslim invasions. In the first, Brahmanism at the time of the Muslim invasions had the support of the state. Buddhism had no such support. What is, however, more important is the fact that the state support to Brahmanism lasted till Islam had become a quiet religion and the flames of its original fury as a mission against idolatry had died out. Secondly, the Buddhist priesthood perished by the sword of Islam and could not be resuscitated. On the other hand, it was not possible for Islam to annihilate the Brahmanic priesthood. In the third place, the Buddhist laity was persecuted by the Brahmanic rulers of India, and to escape this tyranny, the Buddhist population of India embraced Islam and renounced Buddhism. Of these circumstances, there is not one which is not supported by history. Among the provinces of India which came under Muslim domination, Sindh was the first. It was ruled by a Shudra king. But the throne was usurped by a Brahmin who established his own dynasty, which naturally supported the Brahmanic religion at the time of the invasion of Sindh by Ibn Qasim in 712 AD. The ruler of Sindh was Dahir. This Dahir belonged to the dynasty of Brahmin rulers. Humayun Sung had noticed that the Punjab was in his time ruled by a Kshatriya Buddhist dynasty. This dynasty ruled Punjab till about 880 AD. In that year, the throne was usurped by a Brahmin army commander by name Lali Yah, founded the Brahmin Shahi dynasty. This dynasty ruled the Punjab from 880 AD to 1021 AD. It will thus be seen that at the time when the invasions of the Punjab were commenced by Sabuk Tajan and Muhammad, the native rulers belonged to the Brahmanic religion. And Jayapala, 960 to 980 AD. Anandpal, 980-1000 AD, and Trilokanpal, 1000 to 21 AD, of whose struggles with Sabuk Tajan and Muhammad we read so much were rulers belonging to the Brahmanic faith. Central India began to be infested by Muslim invasions which commenced from the time of Muhammad and continued under the leadership of Shahabuddin Ghori. At that time Central India consisted of different kingdoms. Mewad, now known as Udaipur, ruled by the Gilohids. Sambar, now divided into Bundai, Kota and Saroi, ruled by the Chauns. Kanawi I ruled by the Pratihars, Dar ruled by the Parmars, Bundelkhand ruled by Chandelas, and Hailwad ruled by the Chabda, Chedai ruled by the Kalashuras. Now the rulers of all these kingdoms were Rajputs, and the Rajputs, for reasons which are mysterious and which I will discuss later on, had become the staunchest supporters of the Brahmanic religion. About the time of these invasions Bengal had fallen into two kingdoms, Eastern and Western. West Bengal was ruled by the kings of the Pal dynasty. East Bengal was ruled by the kings of the Sena dynasty. The Palas were Kshatriyas. They were Buddhist, but as Mr. Vadiyas says too, probably only in the beginning or in name. As to the Sena kings there is a difference of opinion. Dr. Bhandarkar says they were Brahmins who had taken to the military profession of the Kshatriyas. Mr. Vadya insists that the Sena kings were Aryan Kshatriyas or Rajputs belonging to the lunar race. In any case there is no doubt that the Senas, like the Rajputs, were supporters of the Orthodox faith. South the river Narbada, then existed about the time of the Muslim invasions four kingdoms: 1. The Deccan kingdom of western Chalukyas, 2. The southern kingdom of the Cholas, 3. The Silahara kingdom in Konkan on the west coast, and 4. The Ganga kingdom of Trikalinga on the east coast. These kingdoms flourished during 1000 to 1200 AD, which is the period of the Muslim invasions. There were under them certain feudatory kingdoms which rose to power in the 12th century AD and which became independent and powerful in the 13th century. They are: 1. Devagiri ruled by the Yadvas, 2. Varungal ruled by Kakatiyas, 3. Hailbid ruled by Hoysalas, 4. Madura ruled by the Pundyas, and 5. Travankari ruled by the Cheras. All these ruling dynasties were followers of Orthodox Brahmanism. The Muslim invasions of India commenced in the year 1001 AD. The last wave of these invasions reached southern India in 1296 AD when Alauddin Khilji subjugated the kingdom of Bagiri. The Muslim conquest of India was really not completed by 1296. The wars of subjugation went on between the Muslim conquerors and the local rulers who, though defeated, were not reduced. But the point which requires to bear in mind is that during this period of 300 years of Muslim wars of conquests, India was governed all over by princes who pressed the orthodox faith of Brahmanism. Brahmanism, beaten and battered by the Muslim invaders, could look to the rulers for support and sustenance, and did get it. Buddhism, beaten and battered by the Muslim invaders, had no such hope. It was an unearned for orphan, and it withered in the cold blast of the native rulers and was consumed in the fire lit up by the conquerors. The Musalman invaders sacked the Buddhist universities of Nalanda, Vikramasila, Jagadala, Odantapuri, to name only a few. They razed to the ground Buddhist monasteries with which the country was studded. The monks fled away in thousands to Nepal, Tibet, and other places outside India. A very large number were killed outright by the Muslim commanders. How the Buddhist priesthood perished by the sword of the Muslim invaders has been recorded by the Muslim historians themselves. Summarizing the evidence relating to the slaughter of the Buddhist monks perpetrated by the Musalman general in the course of his invasion of Bihar in 1197 AD, Mr. Vincent Smith says, the Musalman general, who had already made his name a terror by repeated plundering expeditions in Bihar, seized the capital by a daring stroke. The almost contemporary historian met one of the survivors of the attacking party in AD 1243, and learned from him that the fort of Bihar was seized by a party of only 200 horsemen, who boldly rushed the postern gate and gained possession of the place. Great quantities of plunder were obtained, and the slaughter of the shaven-headed Brahmins, that is to say the Buddhist monks, was so thoroughly completed, that when the victor sought for someone capable of explaining the contents of the books in the libraries of the monasteries, not a living man could be found who was able to read them. It was discovered, we are told, that the whole of that fortress and city was a college, and in the Hindi tongue they call a college Bihar. Such was the slaughter of the Buddhist priesthood perpetrated by the Islamic invaders. The axe was struck at the very root. For by killing the priesthood, Islam killed Buddhism. This was the greatest disaster that befell the religion of Buddha in India. Religion, like any other ideology, can be attained only by propaganda. If propaganda fails, religion must disappear. The priestly class, however detestable it may be, is necessary to the sustenance of religion. For it is by its propaganda that religion is kept up. Without the priestly class, religion must disappear. The sword of Islam fell heavily upon the priestly class. It perished, or it fled outside India. Nobody remained to keep the flame of Buddhism burning. It may be said that the same thing must have happened to the Brahmanic priesthood. It is possible, though not to the same extent. But there is this difference between the constitution of the two religions, and the difference is so great that it contains the whole reason why Brahmanism survived the attack of Islam and why Buddhism did not. This difference relates to the constitution of the clergy. The Brahmanic priesthood has a most...
I think we can pause it a little bit here. Because first, this chapter, I think the way I understand is it first talks about the Muslim invasions, and then it's about the Brahminical aspect of it. So maybe we can discuss the first part here, and then maybe we can continue with this chapter. Is that okay? From the 3rd century till almost the 6th to 8th century. During the period of Ashoka and then Guptas, Mauryas and all. So Buddhism was all over India. If you see the region of Ashoka, pretty much almost all India plus Pakistan and Nepal, that entire region was Buddhist region. But towards the end of 8th century, what happens was that's what Dr. Ambedkar tries to explain it here as some of these countries towards the fall of Gupta dynasty, the Chandragupta Maurya and all. So towards the end of that Gupta dynasty, most of these states were owned by Hindu rulers or the Brahminical rulers, and that's what I'm going to try to explain it in the very first section. And then there were Muslim invasions that happened. And because at the time of Muslim invasions, since all the states were the king were Hindu kings or the Brahminical kings, they basically supported Brahmins during the Muslim invasions, whereas they did not support the Buddhist priests. So when during the Muslim invasions, what happened was they tried to. So when you listen to this particular chapter, the Muslims were against the idol worship. So if you see Muslim, the way they practice this thing, it is Allah and all, it's invisible God. So they were against this idol worship, and whoever was practicing idol worship, they were completely against it. And that's the reason they call it as mission to break idols. And during that time, I mean, it is equal to both Brahmins as well as Buddhism. So when they particularly attacked the priesthood, they basically attacked both of them. But what the way I understand what Dr. Ambedkar trying to explain here was, even though they attacked both of Brahmins as well as Buddhism, is the basic difference why Brahmanism survived and not Buddhism. That's mainly because there was a support of Brahminical kings or the Hindu kings to Brahmin priests. So that's what it is. Like first is Buddhism was completely flourished. That is called as the golden period of India, the 3rd century to 6th to 8th century. That is called as the golden period of India, where Buddhism really flourished everywhere, not only in India, but it spread across the globe. Later on, it survived in China, Japan, Burma, and everywhere. But it vanished from India, and that's mainly because of the invasions. If you see the regions that Dr. Ambedkar covered in this particular chapter, is first is the Sindh region, right? So if you see the India's map towards the top, like Pakistan, coming from that side, right? The Muslim invaders, they came from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and that region. So definitely, Aka's region was spread till Afghanistan. If you see, even in Afghanistan nowadays as well, you can find some of the Buddha statues. So definitely Buddhism had reached to that region as well. But then when the Muslim invasions started coming from, first of all, it came from the Sindh region. And in this particular chapter, Dr. Ambedkar explained about the Sindh kingdom, that during the Sindh kingdom, earlier there was a Buddhist king. That Buddhist king is more of a Rai dynasty, right? This particular king who was there during that time, King Rai Sahaji. So there's a story associated to that. His prime minister or wazir, which is called as, he was a Brahmin. So there's a little conspiracy there that the king died in illness. So if you see the history, if you try to dig into the history, the king died of illness, but this prime minister, he married the widow of the king. He married the queen, and then he became the king, right? And then he formed the Brahmin dynasty. So earlier there was a Buddhist dynasty before that in the Sindh region, but during his period, he changed from Buddhist dynasty to Brahmin dynasty. And then there was a Muslim invasion that happened while during this Brahmin dynasty. After the Sindh region, if you go further down, it is the Punjab, and that's what Ambedkar tried to explain it here. The Punjab, nowadays it is Punjab, but at that time it was the province of Gandhar, which is called. The Gandhar region is like nothing but Punjab, Kabul Valley, and Pakistan, that region. So Sindh is a little above that, and then comes the Punjab. That time during the 1st to 9th century, almost pretty much 1st to 9th century, this region was ruled by Kushan Empire. In the history, you will hear about the great Kushan Empire, right? Some of the great kings like King Kanishk and so on, right? So those were the Buddhist kings. So that particular king, again, the similar kind of story happened in that kingdom as well. One of his, I think it was a wazir or some Brahminical minister of his kingdom. His name was Kalar, like Lalaya, Lalia or Kalar, something like that. So he basically overpowered the king. He threw the king in jail, and then he grabbed that kingdom. So it's again the priesthood or the ministers of the same kings. They overpowered Buddhist kingdom. They got into power, and during the Muslim invasion, again during in Punjab, when the Muslim invaded Punjab, there was Hindu king, this Lalaya Shahi. It is called as Lalaya Shahi. And that's what Dr. Ambedkar said in this chapter as well. So the third thing, now after coming from the top, Dr. Ambedkar explains about the central region, and then he tries to explain the Bengal region, like West Bengal and so on. So when we talk about the central region is nothing but all those small dynasties, small kingdoms like Mewar, Udaipur, and so on, right? It's Rajasthan region. So if the Mewar was ruled by Mewadi or this thing, right? Maurya Rajputs, right? During that time, it was the Maurya Rajput, and then it got into the hardcore Hindu Rajputs. But during before that, it was the Maurya dynasty or the Maurya Rajputs, where they were Buddhist, and then it this particular dynasty, it came from Maurya, is nothing but Maurya, the Maurya dynasty. The Maurya dynasty that came in as a Maurya Rajputs. This was basically overpowered by Shunga dynasty. Shunga is nothing but, you must have heard about Pushyamitra, right? Pushyamitra was one of the Brahminic king. There are stories which says that Pushyamitra Shung basically killed most of the Buddhists during that time. So they attacked Buddhists. Pushyamitra is known for persecuting Buddhists during his kingdom. So that's about the central India. Now, when you are talking about the Bengal, or nowadays it is East Bengal and West Bengal, right? So that was ruled by Pal dynasty. Both of them were ruled by Pal dynasty, but then it was the East Bengal basically was overpowered by Sena dynasty. Pal dynasty is a Buddhist dynasty. Then it becomes the Sena dynasty, which is the Hindu dynasty, which is more of like the Sena dynasty is more of they were Rajput supporters, and they had a very orthodox Hindu traditions, if you see that. So all these regions, right, starting from Sindh to Bengal, West Bengal, and so on, all these regions by the time during the 9th century to 1000 BCE, those were the periods when Muslim invaded India. They started invading from the top, and these kingdoms were basically ruled by Hindu kings during the invasion. And the point that Dr. Ambedkar is trying to make here is, even though the Muslims attacked all these things, they attacked all the priesthood, but when they attacked, Brahmins got killed. They tortured Brahmins, they tortured Buddhists as well. But then Brahmins were supported by the kings. So some of them, they could survive the attack of Muslims. Whereas Buddhists, there was no, they were orphans. In some of the paragraph it says that the Buddhism was orphaned during that time. So there was no support for Buddhism from the statehood. Another point in this particular chapter, which talks about the Bihar invasion in Bihar, there is a good paragraph written here. This particular, which talks about the Muslim general who invaded Bihar, right? If you know the history of Bihar, the Nalanda University and all, that time it was even called as Vihara of Bihar, like Bihar and Vihar. It's like the entire Bihar kingdom was considered to be a Buddhist kingdom earlier. So there were the biggest university, Nalanda University, was there. So when basically the Muslim general invaded Bihar, which is around 200 horsemen and all, so that time they made it a point to kill all the Buddhist monks. So in this chapter, if you see, the shaven-headed Brahmins, it says cleanly shaven-headed Brahmins. So if you see, the Brahmins had all the shindy kind of thing, right? But Buddhist monks, they are cleanly shaved heads. So that time for Muslims it was equal. They did not consider these things. But in this chapter it explains that they butchered all the cleanly shaved head monks, which are more of Buddhist monks. So it says that they completely cleaned or completely wiped out, completely slaughtered the monks during that time. And something like when after they were completely slaughtered and when they really wanted to go and look into the colleges or read the books which were there in the university, there was no single priest who was left, or there was no single Buddhist scholar left to even to read those books. So to that extent they killed all the Buddhists during that time. So even though the universities were there, they destroyed all the universities. Not only killing the priest, they destroyed the universities as well as the literature. Even after that, if you say that, the influence of Buddhism on them, like if you read Buddhism, they will get influenced by Buddhism. But somehow they could not read during that time, and there were no priests available to explain what is written in the books as well. So that's how, so to that extent, the Buddhists were basically butchered. And since they did not have any support, ultimately what happened was all the Buddhist monks, either they converted to Islam, either, they were killed. So Buddhist monks and Buddhist followers, right? Not only the monks, but the people who are supporting Buddhism. Since, Ambedkar tries to explain in this chapter is the religion will flourish if the priesthood is available. If there is no priesthood, the religion will not flourish. So, first of all, they killed all the monks. And because there were no monks, the Buddhist followers, the people, they converted to Islam. So either the Buddhist monks were killed or some of these Buddhist monks fled out of India in maybe Burma, Nepal, and so on, right? So they left India, they went to some other countries. So there were no priesthood here, and the Buddhist followers, because there were no teaching of Buddhists during that time, so they either converted to Islam just to get the support from the Muslim rulers. So these are some of the basic reasons why for the fall of Buddhism. So initially during 9th century, so Dr. Ambedkar is trying to say here is fall of Buddhism and decline of Buddhism. So initially during the Brahminical kings taking over the Buddhist kingdoms, that was kind of a decline of Buddhism, and the invasion of Muslims was the fall of Buddhism because they completely butchered all the monks. Now, and that first part is why Brahminism survived because of Hindu rulers, whereas Buddhism could not survive because monks were butchered. The Buddhist followers, they converted to Islam, and all the monks fled out of India. So that's basically the first part of it. Another one good point to be noted here is all these were invasions. They never came here to settle down. So what happened was they invaded, they looted, and then they went back. After some period, they came back again, they looted, and they went back. So the initial invasions, like the Ghazi, whatever the Ghazni and all, right? So those were those invasions, like coming and going, and that's the reason once they go back, the Hindu kings, the Hindu these things were back into action. So that was one of the, right? It's not only coming here, settling down here, but after Akbar and few other these things, who basically planned to settle down. So they formed the kingdom here itself, Shah Jahan and those kings. But that is later, during 1300 BC. After that, but the initial invasions were just like with the purpose of looting and slaughters. So it basically